The card came on a Wednesday, a day that already seemed dull and overcast. For Isabella, raising triplets alone, it was like a punch delivered on luxurious ivory paper. Her former spouse Alexander, now dwelling in a realm of skyscraper offices and custom-made outfits, was tying the knot again. His name, stamped in silver, burned like a mark on her flesh. He claimed the invite was for resolution. But Isabella understood Alexander. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a command for her own public downfall. He aimed to flaunt his fresh existence, his newfound riches, and his flawless new partner before the lady he'd abandoned with only 3 little ones to support. He desired to watch her break. What he was unaware of was that from the ruins of the existence he'd destroyed, Isabella had shaped herself into something indestructible, and she was set to join his celebration. The third-floor apartment on the outskirts of Chicago felt like another planet from the world Isabella once inhabited. Every dawn, her reality was a harmony of minor hardships. The dripping tap in the kitchen that created an endless, irritating beat. The repeated calls of "Mommy, I'm starving," from 3 matching voices. The aroma of old tea and talcum powder that lingered in the space like an extra layer. Ethan, Lucas, and Mia were her entire cosmos. Their messy golden locks, their bruised legs, their radiant, pure grins, they were why she kept going. They were also why she was always deeply, wearily tired. This existence was her truth. A sharp difference from the luxurious bedding and sunlit dawns of her union with Alexander Harrington. Back then, her main worry was selecting which fundraiser to grace, or if the event planner had obtained the right year of wine. Alexander, in his crisp attire and even crisper drive, had created a kingdom in investments, and she had served as his polished consort, the ideal complement to his rapid ascent. She'd abandoned her engineering education, her profession, her core self, to conform to the shape he'd designed for her. And when she'd at last provided him the one item he professed to desire, an offspring, it had demolished all. The revelation of triplets had been a surprise, yet for Isabella an exhilarating one. For Alexander, it was a bother. 3, he'd sneered, the term laced with contempt. Isabella, this isn't a family comedy show. It's disorderly. It's ordinary. He desired one ideal offspring to shape like himself, not a wild group that would upset his spotless, structured world. His aloofness expanded into an abyss, and by the birth of the kids, he was a phantom in their world. The separation was quick and harsh. His attorneys depicted her as an erratic, greedy female, and she, too shattered to resist, had departed with a small payout that vanished in the initial months of baby supplies, milk, and housing costs. He retained the luxury condo, the investments, the life they'd constructed. She was stuck with 3 lovely, crying, amazing infants and the overwhelming burden of beginning anew. The card seemed like a vicious prank, a specter from a history she was frantically attempting to escape. It was tucked amid a last warning for electricity and a discount packet for baby items. The envelope was substantial, lavish, carrying a faint scent of a fragrance Victoria, his betrothed, likely used. Victoria Lang, offspring of a competing mogul in Alexander's domain, a lady whose images in the elite magazines always appeared shiny and unreachable. Their union wasn't merely a bond. It was an alliance, a fusion of influence. Isabella's fingers shook as she cut it open with a butter knife. Alexander Harrington and Victoria Lang solicit the privilege of your attendance. The lettering was a flourish of silver script. Beneath, in Alexander's exact, haughty penmanship, was a private message. Isabella, I sincerely wish you can attend. It would be significant for me to see you there, to end this phase correctly, and proceed without resentment. Without resentment, she murmured, the phrase bitter like soot. Each term was false, a precisely honed arrow. He didn't seek resolution. He sought spectators for his success. He wanted to witness her enter that majestic hall, her attire used, her features marked by the fatigue of lone parenting. And he wanted all to observe how improved his situation was without her. He aimed to demean her, to apply a conclusive, absolute mark on her defeat and his victory. The disparity in status had always been his preferred vice. He flourished on possessing more, being superior. She collapsed onto her sagging couch, the coils creaking in complaint. On the rug, her little ones were constructing a castle from assorted toys, their giggles resounding in the cramped space. Ethan, the considerate one, precisely positioned a piece. Mia, the energetic one, immediately toppled it, shrieking with joy. Lucas, the kind mediator, attempted to soothe his sibling with a pat. They were so ideal. They were all. Alexander had never troubled to distinguish them. He viewed them as one troublesome group. For 3 years, she had managed barely. She accepted independent design tasks, drawing plans for bathroom remodels and patio additions during the quiet hours, her computer balanced on a pile of magazines as her kids slumbered. Each cent was a triumph, each settled invoice a peak scaled. But it was an existence on the brink of collapse, where an ill child or a faulty vehicle could plunge her into arrears. She gazed at the card once more, at the shining silver characters. A gradual, strange blaze started in her core. It wasn't merely fury. It was something cooler, keener. It was determination. Alexander had dismissed her. He'd assigned her the part of the sorrowful, pitiful former spouse. He had constructed a lavish prison for her in their marriage, and when she no longer matched, he had ejected her into the chill. He anticipated her to appear shattered. He anticipated her to feel embarrassed. He was on the verge of being profoundly let down. The panorama from Alexander Harrington's 70th floor workspace was, by all accounts, splendid. The whole of Chicago extended beneath him, a urban domain sparkling in the midday light. To Alexander, it wasn't merely a vista. It was a mirror of his own rule. He was the lord of this realm, a figure who twisted economies to his desire and individuals to his fancy. He straightened his cashmere necktie, the knot impeccable, and savored a dram of his Glenfiddich 30. The golden fluid was velvety, but it offered scant relief to the agitated, corrosive entity within him. His intended, Victoria Lang, was seated across, her stance as flawless as her designer ensemble. She was scrutinizing the wedding card, her digit following the silver imprint. Victoria was not inclined to idle emotion. She was astute, tactical, and fully his match in aspiration. Theirs was a collaboration formed in the conference rooms of their family dynasties, a bond that would establish them as the supreme duo in Chicago's investment scene. "Are you certain about this, Alexander?" she inquired, her tone composed, but with a hint of firmness. She lifted the card, inviting her. "It appears overly theatrical." Alexander twirled the scotch in his tumbler. "It's about being magnanimous, Victoria. Resolution. We shared 8 years. It's the refined approach." Victoria's elegantly shaped brow lifted. She knew him too intimately for such shallow justifications. Refined or a show? You desire her presence to savor the win more sharply, to contrast what you've acquired with what she's forfeited. He despised how accurately she perceived him. It was a quality that drew him to her and alarmed him. "Don't be absurd," he retorted, his tone a bit too harsh. "I feel sorry for her, nothing more. Trapped in some awful tiny flat with those." He couldn't utter their names, the triplets, the turbulent, shrieking symbol of his existence's greatest error. He had pictured a lineage, one son to bear the Harrington title, a youngster he could form. Instead, Isabella's form had defied his plan, yielding a brood. That's how he perceived them, a cluttered, bothersome brood that had marred the neat contours of his world. The reality was, his union with Isabella had been a persistent, subtle embarrassment. She was exceptional. When they encountered each other, she topped her cohort in engineering at Northwestern. The intellect so acute and inventive it daunted him. He'd been captivated by that intellect. But once he claimed it, he'd been driven to blunt it. He urged her to leave her position, to concentrate on their public engagements, to become Mrs. Harrington. He required her as an appendage of him, not a rival. But even in her household duties, her wit emerged in manners that stung his pride. The manner she could unravel his points with serene reasoning. The way his associates were more enchanted by her observations at soirees than his economic forecasts. He had needed to be the star, and she was a rival luminary. Departing her hadn't sufficed. He needed to demonstrate that her excellence was worthless without his funds, his reputation, his sphere. He needed to witness her reduced. The tales he gathered via rumors were delectable to him. Isabella battling with contract jobs. Isabella purchasing food with vouchers. Isabella appearing fatigued and aged. Each anecdote was a salve to his vulnerable spirit. This ceremony was to be the concluding scene. He would position at the altar, a sovereign next to his sovereign, and Isabella would be a serf among the seats, a vivid proof that he was the victor. "She won't attend, naturally," he declared with an assured gesture. "She lacks the courage or an outfit not from a second-hand shop. This is merely a token." "I believe you underrate her," Victoria remarked, setting the card back on his gleaming workstation. "And you overrate your own cunning. This isn't a token, Alexander. It's an incitement. Be cautious she doesn't reply in a manner you're unprepared for." Victoria's intentions were personal. Wedding Alexander was a wise corporate choice. It would cement her role as head of her father's firm and blend their holdings into an impregnable stronghold. She wasn't enamored with Alexander. She doubted he could evoke love, but she admired his brutality. What she didn't admire was this trivial fixation on his former wife. It was a flaw, a defect in his otherwise refined shield. It indicated an emotional vulnerability that might turn into a risk. She was uniting with Harrington Investments, not Alexander Harrington's lingering doubts. "I have everything managed," he asserted, rising and approaching the glass wall. He gazed down at the metropolis, at the multitudes of existences unfolding below. They were all mere insects hurrying on routes he could shift with one call. Isabella was among them. Trivial. "She's from my history. This concerns our tomorrow, Victoria. A tomorrow of total dominance." Victoria observed him, her look inscrutable. "Just recall Alexander," she murmured gently. "The history tends to appear when you anticipate it least, and it seldom comes as you envision." But Alexander wasn't heeding. He was envisioning Isabella's expression upon getting the card. He pictured her silent tears, her powerless anger, the spirit-destroying jealousy. He visualized her in an inexpensive gown, her gaze filled with remorse as she observed him place a 12-carat gem on Victoria's digit. The picture was so clear, so gratifying, it nearly seemed tangible. It was an exhilaration he hadn't experienced in ages, an affirmation of his supremacy he yearned for more than any market conquest. He was Alexander Harrington, and he invariably prevailed. The notion was so reassuring, he overlooked the calculating spark in his own betrothed's gaze as she watched him yearn. She perceived his flaw distinctly, and like any skilled tactician, she was already storing it for later exploitation. The weeks after the card's delivery were a dense, oppressive mist of hopelessness for Isabella. Alexander's deliberate malice had succeeded, at least at first. She experienced every bit of the disgrace he'd planned. She examined her faded pants, the fissures in her home's surfaces, the sparse items in her cooler, and viewed them through his lens, emblems of her setback. The urge to huddle and vanish was enormous. She would discard the card, act as if it never existed, and persist in her life of silent anguish. It was on an especially grim Thursday, following a contract client who had dismissed her recent outlines, insisting on a full revision sans extra compensation, that she reached her limit. With just $32 in her account and the lease looming, she strapped the triplets into their wobbly triple carriage and strolled to the green space, craving the open area to inhale. As the kids frolicked in the dirt pit, she perched on a seat, her face in her palms, the burden of existence bearing down. She was so immersed in her sorrow that she didn't spot the gentleman who paused before her until he addressed her. Isabella Novak, is it you?" The tone was recognizable, a kind baritone from an era past. She raised her head, shading her vision from the glare, and beheld a countenance she hadn't encountered in almost 11 years. Daniel Hayes. He had been 3 years senior in the engineering program at Northwestern, a storm of inventive vigor and compassion. He'd been among the rare ones who advised her she was erring by leaving to wed Alexander. "Daniel," she exhaled, her tone hoarse. He appeared altered, more mature, more assured, clad in a fashionable yet relaxed jacket and slacks. But his gaze was unchanged, benevolent and wise. "I believed it was you," he stated, a broad, sincere grin expanding on his features. His grin wavered a bit as he absorbed her look. The shadows beneath her eyes, the evident air of weariness. "It's been ages. I learned you wed Harrington." The way he pronounced the name was abrupt, lacking esteem. Isabella managed a faint grin. "I did, and then I divorced him. These are mine," she indicated with a burdened soul toward the dirt pit. "Ethan, Lucas, and Mia." Daniel's gaze brightened as he regarded the kids. "Incredible triplets. You were always an achiever, Novak." He knelt, greeting the youngsters with a warmth that constricted Isabella's throat. He didn't regard them as a load or a clutter. He regarded them as kids. They conversed for more than 60 minutes. Isabella, astonishing herself, discovered she was spilling the entire tale, the oppressive union, Alexander's harshness, the savage split, her present difficulties. She even shared about the wedding card. She anticipated sympathy, but Daniel's look solidified into another thing. Righteous outrage for her. "That's not resolution, Isabella. That's a communal shaming," he declared, mirroring her own ideas. He was perpetually an uncertain tyrant. "I never grasped what you admired in him. Your blueprints, your ideas. You were the most gifted in our group. You were destined to transform the cityscape." Hearing those phrases, having someone recognize the individual she once was, the one she had interred under strata of being Mrs. Harrington and then parent, was like a latch unlocking in a corroded mechanism. A segment of her she believed deceased sparked alive. "That individual is vanished, Daniel," she uttered softly. "I sketch bathroom expansions now when I can secure the assignments." "No," he responded, his tone resolute. He positioned beside her on the seat, his vigor concentrated and fervent. That individual is slumbering. Hear me, Isabella, this may seem insane, but I think this is destiny. My company Hayes Designs, we recently secured the contract for the new Lakeside Renewal Initiative. It's a huge endeavor, an eco-friendly mixed-purpose area. The primary designer on my staff just departed for arrival, and I'm in a predicament. He faced her completely. The starting design ideas are bland. They miss heart. They miss the sort of people-focused, elegant utility that you excelled in. I recall your final project, that city refuge concept. It was groundbreaking. Isabella gaped at him, her pulse accelerating. Daniel, I can't. I haven't handled a big assignment in 11 years. I have 3 young ones. My existence is turmoil. I don't require you in a workspace 80 hours weekly, he rebutted, his gaze shining with enthusiasm. I need your intellect. Operate from your place. Operate after the kids rest. I don't mind. I'll compensate you an advisory sum, a liberal one, just for your ideas. Create some preliminary drawings. Provide me a concept, something to stir the committee. Show me what that lakeside area should evoke. It was a rescue line hurled from a vessel she hadn't realized was passing. It was frightening. The idea of re-entering that domain, of rivaling, of having her concepts evaluated, it was daunting. But the option, remaining here fractured and penniless, awaiting Alexander's ceremony day to come like a last spike in her grave, was vastly inferior. Why, Daniel? She questioned, her tone quivering. Why would you do this for me? He glanced from her to the kids who were now attempting to heap dirt on his costly footwear, and he merely grinned. Because I've always thought that ability like yours is a dreadful waste, and because honestly, I can't bear the idea of an oppressor like Alexander Harrington having the final chuckle. He rose and gave her a contact card. No obligation, Isabella, but the initiative outline is on our site. Examine it. If you sense that inspiration, contact me. The session with the urban officials is in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. The ceremony was in 4. As Daniel departed, Isabella examined the contact card in her grasp. Daniel Hayes, President, Hayes Designs. It felt weightier than a mere slip of paper. It felt like an option, a tool. Alexander wanted to view her as a casualty. Daniel had just recalled to her she could be a conqueror. She regarded her kids, her lovely, tough kids, and the blaze in her core. The one that had been glimmering since the card came, erupted alive. She wasn't merely going to endure. She was going to construct a fresh realm for them, one drawing at a time. And Alexander's ceremony, it was no longer a command for her downfall. It was a cutoff. The 3 weeks that ensued were a whirlwind of intense vigor, a revival powered by espresso and pure, unfiltered determination. Isabella's small home morphed. The family area floor turned into a vast surface of drafting sheets, engineering drawings, and foam replicas. The odor of talcum powder now blended with the crisp, fresh scent of charcoal and pigment. She labored with an intensity she hadn't sensed in ages, rediscovering faculties in her intellect that had long withered. The initial week was immobilizing. Gazing at the empty sheet, her mind was a tumult of uncertainty. Alexander's voice was a perpetual, poisonous murmur in her ear. You're inadequate. You surrendered. You're solely apparent now. She would draw a stroke, then remove it, her hand trembling. But then she would glance at her kids resting in their communal space, their torsos lifting and dropping in tranquil cadence, and she would discover her strength. This wasn't for her vanity. This was for their tomorrow. She immersed into the Lakeside Initiative, not just as a creator, but as a parent, as a resident who grasped what a society required. She disregarded the stark, lifeless designs Daniel had displayed and began anew. She pictured a zone that respired, verdant tops that served as shared plots, a main square with engaging fountains for youngsters, routes crafted for carriages and mobility aids, and living spaces with adaptable configurations for expanding households. Her creations weren't merely about metal and panes. They were about illumination, bond, and vitality. The engineer she was intended to be was reviving, and she was more exceptional than prior, because now she had experienced an existence beyond the elite enclave. She contacted Daniel late one evening, a week prior to the cutoff, her tone a blend of fear and thrill. "I have an idea," she stated. "It might be wild." "Wild is what I'm compensating you for," he'd answered kindly. "Transmit it." The following dawn he rang her back. He was quiet for an extended instant after she responded. "Isabella," he uttered at last, his tone rich with wonder. "This isn't just an idea. This is the essence. You didn't just create a renewal. You created a district. I'm presenting this to the panel tomorrow." The panel adored it. The urban officials were thrilled. Daniel contacted her with the update that her idea had been fully endorsed as the directing concept for the whole multi-billion-dollar endeavor. He proposed her a permanent role as chief idea creator with a compensation that caused her to inhale sharply and an adaptable timetable that would permit her to work mainly from her residence. He also demanded on disbursing her an instant considerable reward for the endorsed idea. Brilliance, he stated, merits compensation. The day the funds entered her account, Isabella gazed at the figure on her device display and cried. It wasn't just alleviation. It was confirmation. It was the noise of Alexander's voice in her mind finally ceasing. With her fresh assets, her existence started to alter rapidly and discreetly. She employed a marvelous, dependable caregiver, an affectionate lady named Maria, whom the triplets quickly cherished. She relocated from the third-floor apartment and into a roomy, bright four-bedroom unit in a revitalized structure, not in the elite district, but in a kid-oriented area with superior education. For the first time, the kids had individual spaces. Observing them discover their fresh abode, their chuckles bouncing off the newly coated walls, was a delight so deep it ached physically. But her change wasn't solely outward. With Maria's assistance, she had moments. Moments to rest, moments to reflect, moments to recall her identity. She resumed physical activity, not to match a specific size, but for the vigor and sharpness it provided. She acquired fresh attire, refined, subtle items that mirrored her own preference, not Alexander's. She gazed in the reflector and saw not a weary, vanquished female, but Isabella Novak, a parent, an engineer, a survivor. She was crafting a fresh shield, not of riches and rank, but of dignity and achievement. 1 week prior to the ceremony, she entered a premium vehicle rental and reserved a black Lincoln Navigator for the next Sunday. "I require the biggest, most secure child restraints you can supply for 3-4-year-olds," she informed the surprised representative, her tone distinct and stable. Then she accomplished the one task she had delayed. She went seeking a gown. She didn't visit the upscale stores Alexander had once pulled her to. Instead, she discovered a modest autonomous creator with a boutique in the arts district. There she located the ideal attire. It wasn't a gaudy formal wear. It was a striking sapphire blue satin gown shaped with the precise, graceful contours of an expert engineer. It was refined, potent, and completely hers. It was the hue of renewal, of prosperity, of jealousy. As she positioned before the reflector, the satin cool on her flesh, she considered the wedding card still resting on her fresh granite surface. Alexander's aim had been to injure her. Instead, he had supplied her a cutoff. He had unwittingly ignited the trigger on her own uprising. He anticipated her to appear in tatters, a phantom from his history. She intended to come as an image of the tomorrow, a tomorrow he had no role in, a tomorrow she was constructing wholly independently. The idea brought a gradual, authentic grin to her features. The prison was absent. She was at last liberated. In the Harrington Lang cosmos, ceremony arrangements were less about individual choice and more about enterprise-scale occasion coordination. Bloom experts were transported from France. A renowned chef was crafting an 8-course feast, and the attendee roster was a meticulously selected catalog of the globe's economic titans. The ceremony was the communal highlight of the period, an enthronement for the fresh ruler and ruler of the investment arena. But under the lavish exterior, fine fractures were emerging. Victoria Lang was no simpleton. She had joined this pact with Alexander with full awareness, seeing it as a calculated partnership. But his fixation on Isabella was turning into an irritating, unbusinesslike diversion. He referenced her continually, concealed in belittling, compassionate notes that merely emphasized his obsession. I ponder what she'll don. Likely something she crafted herself. He'd mock over morning meal. I had my aide verify her location. It's some terrible section of Chicago. Can you picture? He'd ponder while they examined placement diagrams. Victoria would just affirm, her look calm, while internally her brain was computing. This defect of his was deeper than she'd grasped. It wasn't merely pride. It was a mental injury, and he was scratching at it like a youngster. A man this readily disturbed was a man who could be a hazard. Her patriarch, a merciless leader who had erected his kingdom on leveraging his opponent's defects, had offered her one counsel. Know all about the male you're wedding, particularly the items he attempts to conceal. So Victoria did what she excelled at. She launched a silent, comprehensive probe. She didn't employ firm assets, but her personal connections, a subtle agency that focused on revealing the concealed mysteries of the influential. She desired to learn everything about Isabella Novak's decline, and more crucially, if there was any indication of an ascent. The starting accounts were precisely what Alexander had informed her: a battle, a tiny home, contract work that scarcely covered expenses. But then a month before the ceremony, the information started to shift. First, there was a substantial single payment to Isabella's account from Hayes Designs. Victoria recognized the name. Daniel Hayes was an emerging talent in the design realm, a dreamer who was capturing key urban agreements. A rapid lookup showed Hayes Designs had just obtained the Lakeside Renewal Initiative. Then came the address alteration, a relocation to a high-end apartment complex. A financial record displayed new profiles opening, a caregiver service compensated, premium buys. It wasn't the image of a female in debris. It was the image of a female on an abrupt, striking rise. Victoria sat in her workspace examining the dossier. She could, naturally, reveal this to Alexander, but what would that achieve? It would propel him into fury, a compulsive downward turn that would render him even more erratic in the days to their alliance, their ceremony. His concentration would transfer wholly to Isabella, to this fresh unforeseen danger to his tale of control. No, that wouldn't suffice. Instead, Victoria perceived a chance. Alexander's defect could be her asset. His fixation could be the exact element that granted her the advantage in their union from the outset. She would permit him to proceed unaware. She would allow him to orchestrate his magnificent display, totally ignorant that the main performer had revised the narrative. The repercussions would be his to handle, and in the disorder, he would be more reliant on her, more pliable. "Any update on if your former wife is honoring us with her attendance?" She questioned him calmly one night as they completed the placement setups. Alexander jeered, shifting Isabella's label to a spot in the rear beside a chilly entryway and close to the service areas. A concluding minor slight. Still no confirmation. "She's likely debating if she can pay for a ride." "Don't fret, my dear. She'll either skip, which is a victory, or she'll arrive and embarrass herself, which is a greater victory." "And the youngsters?" Victoria posed a meticulously impartial query. "What of them?" Alexander's features soured. "She wouldn't risk it. It's an elegant event. Moreover, she likely can't fund a sitter for one, much less three." He chuckled, a brief, unpleasant noise. Victoria sensed a spark of something akin to disdain. He was so obscured by his own conceit, he couldn't perceive the tempest forming ahead. He viewed Isabella as he'd abandoned her 3 years prior, static in time, a fixed picture of loss. He was readying for a conflict against a specter while a vibrant, living monarch was planning her entry. She decided. She lifted Isabella's label from the remote spot. "You know, love," she stated, her tone sweet. "It appears mean placing her there. Folks will chatter. They'll claim you're vengeful." She relocated the label to a far more visible spot, one toward the front, with a direct sight of the primary table. "Let's position her here. It displays assurance. It displays we're genuinely superior." Alexander's pride inflated at the proposal. Certainly, a dominance maneuver to seat his destroyed former wife prominently was the supreme show of unperturbed excellence. Genius, Victoria. Utterly genius. Let her have a fine view of what she forfeited. Victoria grinned, an ideal, tranquil future bride. "Precisely, my love." She had just provided Isabella a prime view to the collapse of Alexander Harrington. It was a ceremony present to herself. The murmurs at this ceremony were going to be much more captivating than anyone could envision. And the most harmful untruths wouldn't be those spoken about Isabella, but the ones Alexander had been narrating to himself. The dawn of the ceremony broke fresh and bright, an ideal fall morning. In a luxury suite overlooking the harbor, Alexander Harrington awoke sensing like a conqueror on the day of a parade. He'd rested deeply, his visions packed with indistinct, pleasing scenes of conquest. Today, he would solidify his kingdom by wedding Victoria, and he would at last openly obliterate the blemish of his initial union. He examined his image in the reflector as he fastened his luxury tie. Assured, mighty, unbeatable. He sensed a rush of expectation, the same as prior to an aggressive acquisition. This was the ultimate fusion, the one that would safeguard his heritage. The notion of Isabella, if she even ventured to appear, was a small, entertaining aside to his splendid day. Across the city in a sunlight-drenched home that smelled of waffles and new brew, Isabella Novak's dawn was a portrait in managed disarray. Ethan, Lucas, and Mia, attired in charming identical gray outfits she'd purchased for them, were pursuing one another around the family space, their chuckles a happy, wild tune. Maria, the caregiver, was attempting to simultaneously control them and prepare a sack full of playthings, treats, and cleansers. Isabella, however, was a haven of serenity amid the turmoil. She positioned in her sleeping area, gazing at the sapphire gown suspended on the entrance. It was more than attire. It was protection. Every seam contained the recollection of the late evenings she'd invested in her creations, the bravery it required to reclaim her existence. This wasn't a deed of vengeance. Vengeance was Alexander's pursuit, a acrid, destructive feeling. This was a deed of recovery. She was not participating as Alexander's former wife. She was participating as Isabella Novak, and she was bringing her whole universe along. "Are you anxious, dear?" Maria inquired, halting at the sleeping area entrance. Isabella pivoted, a minor, sincere grin on her mouth. "I was, but I'm not now." "It's just an event, Maria." But it wasn't, and they both understood. It was a final declaration. "You look at the event, folks, Mommy?" Mia questioned, pulling on Isabella's cotton wrap. Isabella knelt, adjusting her daughter's tresses. "Yes, darling. We're going to visit someone Mommy once knew, and we must be on our finest conduct, okay?" "Okay," the three echoed, though Mia was already attempting to yank a string from her sibling's coat. As Maria escorted the kids below to await, Isabella started to prepare. She arranged her own hair, allowing it to cascade in gentle curls over her arms. She applied her own cosmetics, highlighting her eyes, which were no longer darkened with fatigue, but vivid and luminous. When she at last donned the sapphire gown, it felt like an extension of her. She gazed at herself in the tall reflector. The female staring back was unfamiliar to the fractured, sobbing female who had obtained that card 4 weeks prior. This female was impressive. Her device vibrated. It was a message from Daniel. "Considering you today. Recall, you're not entering his tale. You're entering yours. Go alter the horizon." His phrases were the last bit of fortitude she required. She inhaled deeply, seized her purse, and exited her sleeping area, the satin of her gown murmuring with each stride. Below, the black navigator was ready. The operator, a skilled and reserved gentleman, held the portal as Maria secured the triplets into their restraints. The inside of the vehicle was ample and scented of pristine hide. It was worlds from the train and the urban transit. "I can escort them to the green space, Isabella. If this is excessive," Maria proposed once more, her gaze full of worry. "No," Isabella declared, her tone steadfast as she entered the seat. "They are the most vital part of my existence. He erased us. Today we're going to remind him that we are real." She regarded her kids, her heart expanding with an intense guardian affection. And moreover, she appended a playful spark in her eye. "They appear remarkably dapper. It would be a pity to squander the outfits." As the navigator departed from the edge, smoothly merging into Chicago traffic, Isabella sensed a deep sense of tranquility envelop her. She was no longer a piece in Alexander's scheme. She was her own participant with her own elements, and she was about to execute a maneuver he would never anticipate. She wasn't traveling to a ceremony to demonstrate something to him. She was going to display to her kids that their mother was resilient, that they should never feel ashamed of their identity or origins, and that occasionally the optimal way to handle a tyrant is to appear at their gathering appearing as if you command the venue. The Langham Inn was a bastion of classic splendor, its grand hall adorned with glass fixtures and overwhelmed by multitudes of pale lilies. The atmosphere was dense with costly scents and the quiet buzz of influential individuals engaging in influential dialogue. This was Alexander Harrington's innate environment, a chamber where fortune was the sole measure that counted. He positioned near the entry, a victorious grin fixed on his features, Victoria, an image of cool elegance beside him. He received felicitations, clasped palms, and surveyed the assembly. A portion of him still seeking the phantom he'd called. He was starting to believe she hadn't possessed the audacity to attend after all. A regret. the degradation would have been superb. And then a subtle change happened at the entry. The quiet buzz of talk hesitated. Heads started to swivel. A wave of murmurs propagated through the chamber like an infection. Alexander tracked their stares, his grin stiffening. A lengthy black vehicle. No, a navigator, elegant and commanding, had arrived at the edge. A uniformed operator opened the back portal. Alexander anticipated seeing a delayed finance tycoon or a digital magnate. Instead, a solitary sapphire blue heel appeared. Then Isabella, she ascended from the automobile, not like a phantom, but like a deity. The sapphire gown adhered to her silhouette, a burst of lively vibrancy against the subdued shades of the metropolis. Her tresses captured the illumination. Her features were peaceful and assured, and her gaze, when they momentarily scanned the assembly, contained not a hint of dread or disgrace. She was stunning, but it was a distinct type of allure than the one he recalled. This was not the managed, refined allure of Mrs. Harrington. This was the unprocessed, irrefutable allure of a female who recognized her own value. A shared, mute inhale traversed the assembly. This was not the demolished female from the rumor sections. This was a rebirth. Alexander sensed the color leave his features. His assured grin wavered, substituted by a veil of astonished incredulity. Victoria next to him stayed utterly motionless, but he could detect the abrupt strain in her limb. She had known or she had guessed, but the genuine astonishment was still ahead. After Isabella emerged, the operator extended back into the navigator. One after another, he released and elevated 3 young kids, all clothed in spotless identical outfits. 3 young ones with the identical golden tresses, the identical broad, inquisitive gazes, triplets. They were not the cluttered, bothersome concept Alexander maintained in his thoughts. They were tangible. They were lovely. They were unmistakably his, and they were unmistakably Isabella's. She grasped their palms, 2 on her right, 1 on her left, and she commenced to advance toward the entry. The 4 of them, akin, a whole, unshakable entity. The sight was a projectile to the structure of Alexander's meticulously built tale. He had summoned a pauper to his banquet to ridicule her destitution. Instead, a monarch had come with her successors, not in a show of necessity, but in a show of a different sort of abundance, a fullness of existence he had rejected and could never reclaim. The murmurs in the hall intensified. Is that Isabella? Heavens, are those his offspring? I heard he abandoned them entirely. She appears astonishing. Each phrase was a sledge to Alexander's pride. He had desired to be the focus, the winner on his seat. But in one astonishing instant, Isabella had captured the whole tale. She wasn't the mournful prelude to his splendid fresh phase. She was the lead in a far more engaging narrative, and he was abruptly a secondary antagonistic figure in it. As she accessed the hall, the assembly separated for her as if she were nobility. She didn't glance at Alexander. She didn't have to. She grinned kindly at a few known countenances, serenely guided her kids through the ocean of staring spectators, and located her spot, the one Victoria had so astutely positioned prominently. She arranged the kids into their seats, extracting minor, silent playthings from her purse for them to engage with. She proceeded with a leisurely poise, fully comfortable, as if she were simply enjoying a Sunday meal with her kids. She was not acting. She was merely existing. And her existence there in all her unforeseen magnificence was a stronger declaration than any outburst could ever be. Alexander remained immobile, his wine glass gripped in his hand. He could sense hundreds of gazes on him, observing his response. They were assessing him. They were sympathizing with him. He, Alexander Harrington, was being sympathized with at his own ceremony. Victoria pivoted to him, her tone a deadly murmur. "You claimed you had this handled, Alexander. It seems your handling has just entered wearing sapphire blue." He could sense his kingdom, the one erected on image and threat, start to quiver on its basis. The snare he had placed for his former wife had just closed on him. The environment in the hall was loaded with a strain so dense it felt like an additional attendee. The ensemble performed onward, a hurried, merry melody entirely mismatched with the spectacle unfolding. For 30 minutes, Alexander stayed frozen, observing Isabella from the chamber. She was the image of parental elegance, bending to murmur to one of her sons, chuckling gently at something another performed. She was disregarding him, and the rejection was more maddening than any direct clash could have been. She was depriving him of his authority by declining to recognize it. At last, driven by a mixture of wrath and degradation, he could endure it no more. He uttered a brief apology to Victoria and marched toward Isabella's spot, a hunter approaching its target. The murmurs trailed him, a surge of expectation undulating through the attendees. "Isabella," he uttered, his tone a deep snarl as he arrived at her spot. He had meant to sound menacing, but a shake of rage revealed him. She raised her head, her look one of gentle courteous astonishment, as if spotting a server initially. "Alexander, what a wonderful gathering. The lilies are somewhat excessive, but Victoria always preferred drama." The serene, casual assessment of his ceremony delivered with the relaxed manner of a critic unbalanced him. "What is this?" he whispered, motioning vaguely at her. "The kids, the whole situation. What sort of scheme are you executing?" "Scheme?" Isabella elevated a brow. She passed Lucas a play vehicle. "There's no scheme, Alexander. You summoned me to your ceremony. I attended. You never indicated I shouldn't include my kids. My regrets if that's a violation of protocol, but as you know, I can't fund a caregiver." The falsehood was conveyed so fluidly, so impeccably. It was a masterpiece. It was a blade covered in honey. Alexander's features twisted. "Don't act ignorant with me. The gown, the vehicle, Hayes, you're employed by Daniel Hayes." He had placed a few urgent calls mere moments earlier. The reality had descended upon him. Isabella stated plainly. "He appreciates my contributions. It appears my intellect didn't deteriorate when I became a parent." Envision that. The kids, detecting the strain, had become silent. Ethan, the empathetic one, glanced from his mother to the furious male, his bottom lip starting to quiver. "You did this to degrade me," Alexander charged, his tone escalating. Isabella finally abandoned the calm pretense. She leaned ahead, her gaze flashing with a chill blaze he hadn't witnessed in ages. "No, Alexander, you summoned me to degrade me. You desired me to slink in here, fractured and embarrassed, to act as a setting for your splendid fresh existence. You desired to indicate me and display everyone how elevated you'd become. The sole action I took was decline to perform the role you composed for me. This," she uttered, her tone dropping to a whisper, "is not my degradation. It's a reflector, and you dislike what you observe." It was then that Victoria arrived, sliding to a stop beside her fresh spouse. She didn't glance at Alexander. She glanced at Isabella, and for the initial time, there was a glimmer of something besides chill calm in her gaze. "Admiration, Isabella," Victoria stated, her tone smooth as satin. "I'm delighted you could attend, and your kids are lovely." She then directed her stare on Alexander, and the climate chilled by 15 degrees. Alexander, love, our attendees are starting to question why you're harassing a lone parent and her kids. It's a terribly poor image. It implies unpredictability. The term lingered in the atmosphere, a communal condemnation. Unpredictability in their domain. It was a fatal verdict, an indication of a poor venture. Alexander was ensnared. He was being surpassed by both his former wife and his fresh one. He gazed at Isabella's kids, truly gazed at them, and perceived not just her resistance, but his own rejected heritage. He perceived 3 ideal little boys and a girl who would mature addressing another male as father. He perceived an existence of affection and joy he was fully barred from. In that instant, something within him fragmented. The conceit, the arrogance, it all disintegrated, leaving only the bare, gnawing uncertainty that had been present throughout. "Depart," he gasped, the phrases scarcely heard. "Just depart." Isabella rose, her actions intentional and elegant. She assembled her kids who adhered to her, detecting the conflict was concluded. She gazed Alexander in the eye one final time, and there was no animosity in her stare, only a remote, analytical sympathy. "Gratitude for the summons, Alexander," she declared, her tone distinct and resounding in the now hushed hall. "It was precisely the impetus I required." She pivoted and departed, her kids following. The assembly separated for her again, their countenances a blend of wonder and empathy. She hadn't elevated her tone. She hadn't created a disturbance. She had merely appeared as herself, and in doing so, had methodically deconstructed a mighty male with nothing but the facts. As Isabella and her triplets exited the Langham, abandoning the wreckage of a gathering behind them, Alexander Harrington was left solitary in the middle of the chamber, the attention he desired now a severe, merciless light. He was encircled by his riches, his authority, and his ideal bride, and he had never sensed so completely, ruinously destitute. The outcomes of his malice were just commencing. The ceremony feast concluded not with an explosion, but with a silent, disastrous fade. As soon as Isabella departed, the mood became intolerable. The attendees, having observed the spectacular breakdown of their host, offered their apologies and began to disperse. The courteous pretense of the magnificent festivity had been broken, and all that remained was the uncomfortable, unsightly reality. Alexander positioned amid the fading lilies and partially vacant wine glasses, a ruler in a swiftly emptying fortress. Victoria neared him, her headpiece already taken off, her features a veil of chill wrath. That, she declared, her tone empty of any affection, was the most degrading public display I have ever had the ill fortune to participate in. Our union, this alliance, was dependent on an image of resilience, steadiness, and dominance. You have revealed yourself to be trivial, fixated, and sentimentally unstable. You are a risk, Alexander. She orchestrated it all, Victoria. Can't you perceive? He implored, desperation infiltrating his tone. Of course she did, Victoria countered. She was incited, and she replied with an expert tactic. She didn't degrade you, Alexander. She merely presented a reflector and permitted you to degrade yourself. My patriarch will learn of this. Our attorneys will contact you. She turned sharply and exited his existence, leaving him solitary with the 8-course feast that would never be consumed and the ensemble that had at last become quiet. The repercussions were swift and severe. Reports of the calamitous ceremony propagated through the economic realm like blaze. Accounts of his harshness to his former wife, of the presence of the offspring he had forsaken, depicted him as a fiend. Agreements that had been nearing completion were abruptly delayed. Influential partners ceased responding to his communications. His authority had always been constructed on a meticulously shaped illusion of unbeatability, and Isabella had revealed it as nothing more than a delicate pretense. In the ruthless domain he occupied, an injured hunter is rapidly consumed. Meanwhile, Isabella wasn't perusing the rumor sections or delighting in Alexander's collapse. She had escorted her kids for frozen treats after they departed the ceremony. As they positioned in the green space, their countenances adhesive and elated, she sensed a buoyancy she hadn't known in years. The conflict was finished. The phase was truly and finally sealed. Her salvation wasn't in Alexander's agony. It was in her own accomplishment. Her collaboration with Daniel Hayes prospered. The Lakeside Initiative became her fervor, and her novel people-focused creations earned honors and praise. She was no longer Alexander's former wife. She was Isabella Novak, one of the most thrilling fresh voices in contemporary engineering. She had discovered her authority not in dismantling another, but in constructing something lovely and enduring. Months afterward, she was at the location of the Lakeside Renewal, observing the initial bases being established. Daniel positioned beside her, a proud grin on his features. Her kids frolicked nearby in a provisional secure play zone she had created for the building workers' households. She had constructed a fresh existence, a fresh horizon, a fresh tomorrow, all from the remnants of a history someone else had attempted to incinerate. She was no longer characterized by the male who had abandoned her, but by the realm she was generating for her kids. The vehicle and the sapphire gown hadn't been a disguise for a solitary day of vengeance. They were merely the external emblems of an inner change that was genuine, deep, and lasting. The sun was descending over the metropolis, projecting an amber radiance on the ascending metal frameworks. And for the first time in a very extended period, Isabella sensed she was precisely where she was meant to be at the beginning of her own splendid invention. Isabella's remarkable path demonstrates that genuine authority isn't about riches or rank, but about the resilience you discover when you have nothing remaining to forfeit. She didn't pursue vengeance. She pursued salvation and discovered it by reconstructing her existence on her own conditions. Alexander's tale is a potent reminder that malice stemming from uncertainty will always ultimately cause its own demise. What did you think of Isabella's magnificent arrival? Was Victoria an antagonist or merely a tactician? Share your opinions in the comments below. If you were touched by this tale of disloyalty and final victory, please like this video, distribute it with someone who needs to see it, and join for more memorable tales.